let's start with the first question, right? All right, you're going to be going back to Lahaina soon. We can see some of your articles that you wrote on the Substack, and please go check it out. But why do you think, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I think it'd be great to bring it to the table. Why do you think people are so fascinated on how this thing got started? Do you believe that it's kind of like inflated and propagandized and pumped into our rhetoric to get us away from what led to the situation? Like, people aren't discussing why Lahaina was, fit for a fire like this, why it was a tinderbox. Instead, they're talking about, direct energy weapons and space lasers and all this other stuff. Why do you think people are so fascinated with that conversation over there?
Well, I think it goes back to my remark a moment ago. I mean, a big piece of a big swath of the American citizenry has this, I would call it a kind of gut instinct or feeling of unease, that we do live in an era in which the official leadership, consists of dog kings, and what's really running the show are unstated, undeclared, military, financial, high-tech interests that are, I think the feeling or the anxiety or perhaps even the dread is that our popularly elected leaders aren't actually in charge. There are powerful, technically, highly capable, nefarious interests that are in charge. And so what I perceive happening is that is a very dreadful mental state to be in. I mean, one is in a constant state of hypervigilance that we don't know who's running the show. It kind of seems like nefarious, selfish, exploitative interests are running the show. So there's this posture to perceive disasters to have, really bad, really technically powerful people that are kind of Wizard of Oz type characters pulling the strings behind the curtain. And I don't reject the intuition. I just think that our job as investigative reporters is to actually follow the evidence and not overreact to suspicious circumstances. I mean, the suspicious circumstances are the beginning of an examination. They're not, you can't just declare, we know what's going on here. Yeah. Well, it doesn't really get you anywhere. It gets you excited, but it doesn't, it's not illuminating.
We had a conversation yesterday for about an hour when we were prepping, getting ready for today. And I think we agree on so many things. And one of the things we do agree on, and the same mentality, that this is going to be something that's going to take years before we figure out everything, right? You said the suspicious circumstances, what a lot of other reporters are going there, and they're basing their whole reporting based upon this. They're not letting us inside. They're guilty. They're not showing us anything. They're guilty. Yet they're not mentioning the situations that led up to the Lahaina fire, like in 2018. Can you shed some light on what happened in 2018? Because I think it's such an important part of the picture that's not talked about when you're talking about the Lahaina fire that just happened last month. Go ahead.
Well, so I should say that I've lived about an aggregate of 5 years on Maui, and in the summertime, I used to go surfing at Lahaina Breakwall almost every day. They get a nice south swell in the summer. And I, for a long time, perceived that the city or the old town of Lahaina was facing a very high fire threat, and for reasons that we can discuss. But in 2018, you had a very, very similar meteorological event. You had Hurricane Lane that tracked to the south, creating a big low pressure to the south. And then you had this big summer high trade wind pressure to the north. And the pressure gradient there, right there and goes right through the Hawaiian Islands, created this very high wind effect during the dry season. And, during the dry season, since the plantation, the old Lahaina plantation shut down, they've shut down the irrigation. But at the same time, and this is a slight nuance, you do get a wet season in the winter. And so you do get water falling on the land uphill of town in the winter in the wet season, which promotes a lot of growth of grasses and brush and weeds. Summer comes, Maui's a monsoon climate. All of those weeds and grasses and brush desiccate, and now you have a bunch of fuel, and it's dry. And if you get a spark or a homeless person, throwing a cigarette, or it could be any number of that, or a power line going down, there's huge risk. And we saw this. How to describe it? We saw a dress rehearsal for what just happened on August 25th, 2018. I have friends in Lahaina. They said it was a very close shave. A lot of houses actually did burn in 2008.
Could I stop you for 1 second? Because there's two things I want to address part of this conversation. I don't want to get lost while we're there. First, let's talk about the winds that came through, because when a lot of people do talk about all these particular theories and they say, oh, space laser, directed energy weapon, the one that scratches my curiosity is the winds, the weather modification. But you're saying that some of these winds have come through before and it's normal for it to come through the way Maui is set up?
Well, it depends on how deep you want to go into meteorology, but some basic principles. You get a big low to the south and a big summer high to the north. So you have it goes from low to high. From high to low, So you get a big pressure gradient, and you get the West Maui Mountains, which are a considerable geological feature just right there in the middle of the Pacific. Those mountains create this I guess you would call it a Venturi effect, where you get these downslope winds that blast right onto Lahaina. A downslope wind is also a drying wind. It dries everything out. It's like a gigantic hair dryer that's rolling down, removing the humidity from the air as it blasts down the hill. I have been surfing just south of Lahaina on the same west coast at a surf break called Thousand Peaks, and seen a microburst of wind come down off the West Maui's, pick up a picnic table, and throw it 50 feet through the air.
Okay,
you can get some big winds. So there was probably a 4 or 5 hour window, maybe 8 hour window, when there might have been a 300-year wind event on August the 8th. In that narrow band right there, in that pressure gradient on the west side of the West Maui Mountains.
So it's logical that these winds could have come through. You just said so that's a wooden picnic table, I'm assuming you've seen picked up and throw 50 yards, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Let's so that's boom. That's
okay, but may I just say, though, so I always like to start with natural phenomena before I jump to the U.S. Navy or whoever they is, going out with their mechanisms for creating or manipulating weather. I'm not saying this isn't possible.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. I would just like to see the kind of evidence that would at least stand up in civil court, like a preponderance of evidence. Like, show me something that I could go before a court and say, what is going on here? You guys are modifying the weather. We need to see that rather than just speculating about it.
Got it. Let's talk about before we get back to 2018, because I think that was part of this whole story, because the water diversion issue, I think where we have a little bit of a differences, and maybe not much, because I think you've also said it's very possible. I've been talking about the water diversion for years, right? And I'm still learning a lot about this. But you have a little bit more of a nuanced approach about it. It's not as simple as I've made it say, as I have said that they've been diverting water from these indigenous and local areas for many years to the golf courses, to the ritzy areas. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. Can you talk about the water diversion? Because if you've ever been to Maui, the southwest part of Maui is brown and dry, and the northeast area near Hana is green and wet. So give us a little bit of your opinions as far as the water diversion. It's not as simple as just taking it away from poor people, is it?
Well, I mean, there are entire books written about the quarreling over water on West Maui. I mean, this is a long-standing conflict. One thing that I would make clear is it's true what you said. The east side of Haleakala, even going all the way down on the north side of Haleakala, all the way to the valley, tends to be quite wet. But also, it's quite fascinating. The east slope of the West Maui Mountains is one of the wettest places on Earth.
Yeah.
If you go by a helicopter, you can fly over the slope of the eastern slope of the West Maui Mountains, and there are waterfalls everywhere. Fly another 300 yards to the western slope, and it's bone dry.
Yeah.
So this is just a feature of a geologic feature of the island. The water precipitates out on the eastern slope. So going back to the 19th century, these sugar barons brought in a bunch of engineers and labor and built these ditches to irrigate the sugar plantation around Lahaina. And if you look at Lahaina, you can still look at photographs, even as late as the 1990s. And all around the town, that smokestack in the middle of town, which kind of marked the old mill, it's completely green with irrigated sugarcane. So they shut down the plantation in 1999, and when they did that, they shut down the irrigation. So the question is, where is the water now going?
Yeah.
And the kind of textbook thing is, well, it's going to the golf course at Kaanapali Resort, which is just north of Lahaina. It's being diverted to developments for golf, for swimming
Waterfalls.
Waterfall. Right. It's also there is some effort to restore indigenous style agriculture, taro farms. The water is going to taro farms as well. But I mean, to me, this is one of the most fascinating questions to be pursuing is, what is exactly the deal with the water? It reminds me of that Polanski movie, Chinatown.
Yeah, that's what I said when we did the story on Wednesday.
That's why I brought John Leake here for you, to give you the answers that you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I like Chinatown, and I love the scene where Jack Nicholson he's like looking at this irrigation infrastructure, and this little guy walks up and flips a switchblade. You sniff around here, you'll get cut, and he cuts his nose. That was actually Polanski himself doing it, that cut his nose. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I've wandered all around in the hills up above Lahaina, and I keep waiting for some nefarious character to walk up
with a switchblade, John. Come on now,
a switchblade in my nose. But the water is it's a fascinating thing. I wish I had all the answers for you guys. That's part of my objective with my research.
Let me just say, John, I'm glad you don't have all the answers, because it's not a quick fix. And this is something I've been talking about. There's some reporters and people showing up on the island saying, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And they think they're going to present this information that's the case, cracker. It's open. No, this is going to take a long time, because also there's a lack of transparency from the state officials, and they don't want to get that information out. It seems like they're hiding the truth, but that doesn't mean you could put all the pieces together until you find out the information. And you've done a book. I think it took you 5 years, right, of investigating before you came out with this information. I think that a long, thorough investigation is what's needed, and it's going to be up to reporters like ourselves to keep bringing forth the information as it goes along, especially for those who most need, those people of Lahaina right now, that are the ones that are suffering the most right now, that seem to be abandoned at this time. So I like the fact that you are taking your time to find out the right information, because there's a lot of information that you need to find out, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complex story. You've got the water, you have this very poor administration, a lack of investment in the power grid. I mean, I've driven the road up to Lahaina before, where you see old power poles, old wooden power poles that look like, you know, they could be pushed over by a 40-knot breeze. I mean, there's just a general lack of care and management. You know, a friend of mine likes to point to that funny scene in the film Animal House where Dean Wormer says to Kent Dorfman or Flounder, he says, you know, you've got, you know, an F or a 0-point grade average. Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son. I mean, I sort of feel like we Americans are sort of in the way we manage things. It's the sort of Kent Dorfman school of management. We don't take care of things. I mean, that sounds rather rude, but I mean, I'm trying to be kind of humorous about it. I mean, there is this, it's like, don't invest in the power grid. You know, don't put in new poles that can withstand severe wind. Don't invest the resources to do the kind of daily grind of taking care of things. Yeah. Don't make the investment. And then when, you know, all hell breaks loose and a whole town is wiped out, you know, then the U.S. government comes in. With all kinds of emergency funding for this and that. I mean, read the White House's declaration of all of the stuff they're doing, and you think, well, why weren't these investments made before? Like, why must we wait for catastrophe to strike before we invest?
That's where the question comes in. That okay, right. Like, you know, what we talked about, like, you know, you co-author the book with Peter McCullough, so we start to understand this, you know, ruling class and this, you know, I used the term earlier, this time of acceleration where the ruling class wants more and it wants to give you less. They want more resources, more money, and they want to take away your civil liberties. You have less of a voice. And sometimes it only makes sense when you look at Lahaina and you have people like Governor Josh Green, who happened to be the keynote speaker at the UN for 15 Minutes Sustainable Cities. It starts to make you wonder, going, wait a second, maybe this is their plan all along. And you've mentioned in 1999, I think, is when the sugarcane factory started closing down, right? And then you had 2018, where you had a slap in the face warning and still nothing was done. So my question I want to pose to you really quickly, because I know we're going to wrap it up, we don't have much time left, is from what you're seeing initially, do you think it is possible, from what we've heard, from what little we've heard from the government response, did you think it's possible that somebody somewhere shut down the water?
Well, I mean, there's already talk of, I mean, I think West Maui Land Company has stated that we put in a request for some kind of water diversion to the ponds or the irrigation tanks above town. And there were some kind of last minute phone calls, and there apparently was not sufficient pressure in the fire hydrants to provide enough water to fight the fire. Apparently there wasn't.
Yeah. How was that possible after 2018 is what I'm saying. That to me is why I'm just like, that after 2018, that is not possible. Somebody had to do this deliberately.
So I have an informant on Maui who and he wants to fly under the radar, but I mean, he actually works with the Maui Fire Prevention Bureau. And he said, I've been telling these guys for years, you guys are not prepared. You are not paying attention to hydrant pressure. You're not making sure that the water pressure is available to fight fire. And he just scrolled through his phone of just these blatant, massive code violations just everywhere, where there is not attention given to preventing fire. So then the question becomes, well, what is the Maui Fire Prevention Bureau in the business of doing exactly? But this raises, this other issue about management. I mean, I don't want to pick on the administrative class of Maui, but they don't. I mean, everything from Maui Memorial Hospital, which is now a Kaiser institution, to the old power grid, to the fire prevention, kind of you name it. It just doesn't feel like there's real investment being made in any of this. So then, yes, I mean, you think, well, okay, if the investment's not being made by the citizenry that lives on the island, the sort of the middle class, well, it's probably going to end up being made by tyrants. People with big money and big resources are going to say this is an underused. I mean, I think this is a legitimate investigative hypothesis. If the what passes for the middle class on Maui isn't administering this place, then some big money will come in and will administer it. But we're going to administer it in a way that is advantageous for us. So I can see that as a general investigative lead. Like, let's look at that hypothesis. So anyway.
Yeah. Without showing your cards, John, when you return to the island, what are you looking for most at this point? Now that it's almost a month since things have played out, for me, I went back there with the objective, obviously, to learn about what happened before, during, and after. But I went there with hopes of being able to keep the people on Lahaina in Lahaina, because to me, it seemed with all the silence and the lack of transparency and the hiding of what simply happened, it's like an orchestrated gentrification. That's just my personal opinion here, and a lot of people share the same opinion. So for me, my objective was also to show the people with these distribution centers, the mutual aid by the citizens instead of the NGOs that our tax dollars go to help them out, and I've been able to do that. But as I return to the island, I want to make sure I continue to tell their story. Without showing your cards, what are you going back to seek more than anything at this point right now?
Well, I mean, I've been slowly, methodically cultivating contacts of people who really care about Lahaina, care about Maui, and care about the truth. And I've been trying to win their trust and show them that I'm a serious investigative author. I don't jump to conclusions. I methodically investigate. Peter McCullough and I wrote our book together about the pandemic response. Not a single person has come to us and has been able to say we got a single fact wrong. No one could point to one mistake we made in the book. And so that is my approach to things. I don't speculate wildly. I mean, I will follow a suspicion if I see one, but I look methodically, and that's what I'm doing with informants on the island, people who are very close to the ground and very invested in the truth.
Yeah. Well, John, I wish you nothing but the best of luck with your work. I look forward to going back to the island and learning more, and we'll stay in close touch with your work as it matriculates out. Let everybody know where they can find you and how they can help John Leake further his work.
Well, I'm just building a new website because I have a new book coming out, authorjohnleake.com. It's not live yet, so I suppose this is premature. Do a web search for author John Leake. Also, Peter McCullough and I, our book, you'll find, let me go ahead and just say this. Go to my website with Dr. McCullough, couragetofacecovid.com. And that will be your gateway to looking at other work I'm doing now. And then Peter and I have a Substack, Courageous Discourse, with Dr. Peter McCullough and John Leake. So you can find us on Substack. Peter tends to write about medical stuff. I write about medical stuff too, but I'm a true crime guy, so I like these big organized crime stories.
It seems like Lahaina is one giant crime story, and I'm glad you're there fighting for the truth. John Leake, ladies and gentlemen.
I think the entire United States should be viewed prima facie is a gigantic mafia at this point. We seem to be.
There is no mafia.
we seem to have moved into a mafiosi era. It's the era of bosses, of capos. So it's a good time to be an investigative reporter.
I call them a cartel, but it's the same thing. John Leake, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Tampa, Boca Raton, Orlando, Dallas, Houston, San Diego, Bloomington, Illinois, Indianapolis, and Levittown, New York. Wow, that's a lot of dates. See you there.